This episode is brought to you by Bumble. So, you want to find someone you're compatible with, specifically someone who's ready for a serious connection, totally open to having kids in the future, is a tall, rock-climbing Libra, and loves rom-coms with vegan pizzas on Tuesdays just as much as you do. Bumble knows that you know exactly what's right for you. So whatever it is you're looking for, Bumble's features can help you find it. Date now on Bumble.
Hello and welcome to Want to Hear Something Weird? A weekly weird podcast about weird stuff with perfectly normal hosts. I'm one of them. My name's Tom.
I'm Laura.
Laura, do you want to hear something weird?
Always.
We've talked about, we've done a few episodes so far about like UFOs and aliens and like encounters and whatnot, right?
Yes, we have.
But one that I don't think we've done yet is alien abduction. Where do you stand on alien abduction? Pro or against?
Ooh. Wasn't prepared to be asked this daunting question.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it would require such a nuanced answer. I thought it was pretty clear, either pro or against.
Oh, well, I would hate for anyone to get abducted that doesn't want to be abducted.
Well, I'm against it for me, but pro for other people.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Hey, gives interesting stories.
Now, what if I were abducted?
If you were abducted, unless you liked it, then I'd be
supportive of whatever.
I'd be supportive of your choices.
Thank you.
To be abducted in the future, if that's what you wanted.
Yeah, just generally across the board. Not a huge fan of anything that's abducted in any circumstance that doesn't want to be.
Yeah. I guess that's true. But the things I would least like to abduct me would be aliens. Right? I'd rather be abducted by a person than aliens, I think.
You think you got a shot of?
I could potentially overpower a person. It sounds like a lot of times these aliens, they're not playing by the rules.
And with the people, you actually know what's going on. With aliens, it's like, what?
Yeah.
No?
It's like, oh, this person wants to kill me or do something bad to me or steal from me. But yeah, aliens, we don't really know what they're out there doing, what they're out there kidnapping people for. Although, for the most part, they do seem to bring people back. You know? There aren't a lot of... What?
We hear about the ones that get brought back.
That's true, yeah.
A lot of people go missing that you never hear about.
Yeah,
what happened.
There are a lot of, particularly people that go missing in national parks in America, that a lot of people believe there's something more sinister behind it, something perhaps paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this one that we're going to be talking about today it's the case of Betty Andreason. Andreasson?
Okay.
One of
Andreasson?
those.
I don't know.
Andreasson.
Okay.
And I'll let the listener choose how they... I'll just spell it every time, and then you can hear it how you want. I'm going to say Andreasson.
Okay.
Because I think that's right. So Betty Andreasson was a pretty famous abductee. Sadly, I believe she passed a couple of years ago.
Mm.
But she had a best-selling novel called The Andreasson Affair, or The Andreasson Affair.
Already changing.
I know. And it's about a lot of stuff, but it centers around one particular abduction that happened to her, which turned out to then unlock a bunch of other abductions she didn't know happened.
Oh.
Which, is also
to her?
To her, yes.
Ooh.
Which is also a thing that controversial because this was uncovered through like guided hypnosis sessions.
Okay.
Which a lot of people say that can implant memories, false memories. You're kind of leading somebody to that conclusion.
Right.
But we're dealing with what we've got here. But it all starts with a story that she did remember, and that's what led to everything.
Okay.
So on the evening of January 5th, 1967, I believe she was about 30 at the time. And she had a lot of kids. I don't know if she had all of her kids by now, but she had 7 kids.
Wow.
So she was home in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts. Yes, with her 7 kids and parents. She did have the 7 kids by then, by 30.
Wow.
That night around 6:30, Betty was working in her kitchen when her house's power went out for a brief second. As Betty rushed to the front door to check on her 7 children, a red light suddenly flashed through the kitchen window and caught her father's attention. When Betty's father went up to the window to check out the source of the light, he saw a group of small gray aliens hopping toward the house.
Oh, hopping.
Hopping, yeah.
Okay. You like how that's the part that I'm like,
oh, they were hopping? No.
Aliens?
I'm calling BS on this. They don't hop. And I believe her husband was in the hospital at the time. He had been in a car accident.
Okay. Oh, geez.
And I think maybe even that's why her parents were there. They were helping out.
Okay.
So after this, the 4 small gray aliens moved in a single file. They were all wearing dark blue, tight-fitting uniforms. They entered her house by passing through a solid wood door. Just phasing right through the door.
Okay.
Asked her telepathically to come with them while the rest of the household, which again was her 7 kids and her parents, remained in a sort of suspended animation. So everybody else was frozen in place.
Oh, okay.
These 4 aliens come gliding in. Apparently they were kind of floating. And the only person that, besides her, that has a memory from this is her dad has a memory of what he described as a kid wearing a Halloween costume peering through the window, which is very scary.
So it's almost as if at this point that they are singling her out.
Yes.
Everyone else is frozen, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're interested in her. They've
okay.
definitely honed in on her. Now, you would probably think, well, she's a mother with 7 children. Surely she's not just going to say, hey, yeah, all right, I'll come with you guys. I'll just leave my frozen children here. I'm sure they'll be fine.
That is what I would think, yes.
So I don't know if she said something about that, or if they were communicating telepathically already, so they may have been able to just know that was a concern of hers and preempt it. So to show them that her family was okay, they snapped her 11-year-old daughter Becky back into animation, and Becky told her mom, "Don't worry,
what?
Don't worry, everything's fine." And then the aliens froze her again.
Okay.
Which to me is like, now, did you guys just use her as a puppet to make her say that?
Well, that's what I would think.
Yeah, because why else would she say it's okay? And if she really believes that, why'd they have to go back to freezing her?
And also, I'm sorry. Well, I always want to believe people.
Mm-hmm. But we'll come to there's a lot of skepticism about this.
What I was just thinking is, would that be enough to convince a mother to be like, oh yes, I'll go off with these aliens to have that interaction?
Yeah, they reanimated.
She'd be like, no, I know better than you.
Right.
This is very weird.
I'm not just going to trust my frozen 11-year-old daughter's intuition on this one. So they took her outside and brought her into a silver spacecraft. And that took off into the sky and then entered a bigger mothership.
Okay.
Over the course of about 4 hours, Betty was subjected to some medical experiments and a surgery.
You never want that.
No. And a surgery which removed a tracking device that had been put in her nose in an earlier encounter that happened in the 1950s.
Oh, so this was not her first.
Yes, this was not.
It's the first
unbeknownst to her,
right.
It was not her first rodeo.
So that explains why they were singling her out.
Yes. During, and again, this is where things, parts of this story get I don't know why this part would be any less believable than anything else. But during her abductions, the aliens told Betty that they worship Jesus Christ. They claimed that the second coming would happen soon, and then they took Betty to a room where she talked to a tall being she would later call the One. So a lot of people look at that as like, really? The aliens, they're into Jesus? That was only 2,000 years ago, the birth of Christianity.
Yeah.
And they're presumably tens of thousands, maybe millions of years further advanced than us. But maybe they're like, hey, Christianity is the cool new thing. We're going to be Christian aliens.
Maybe.
So they took her to a tall being that she would later call the One. And this tall being gave her an allegorical vision of a giant phoenix-like glowing bird. This is like a 15-foot tall bird, she said.
Wow.
Which suddenly turned into a pile of ash from which a fat gray worm crawled out. After that, a booming voice told Betty she had been chosen to carry a very important message to mankind.
Oh, boy.
And I think that was like the message. Just
that
a
Jesus
bird,
Christ. Oh.
a bird turning into a worm. And she was supposed to kind of like interpret that as she chose.
Do we ever get to know what
Not
she
that I could find. I did not read her entire book, so I'm not entirely sure if she had more potential insights on that and what all that meant. She was a Shaker, which, do you know what do you know the Shakers?
I do.
They're the Quakers and the Shakers.
I am familiar.
The Shakers are named the Shakers because they're ecstatic dances they would perform during religious ceremonies. They originated in the UK, moved to America in the 1770s, established themselves in Massachusetts, where she was born and lived. And yeah, they have egalitarian views between genders, allowing women to hold leading positions in their communities.
What a concept.
Yeah, so that's pretty neat. They practice celibacy, but I don't know. I believe that's probably before marriage because they have kids. So
they have 7 children. Then.
Yeah, they have 7 children.
Aren't heading up.
That didn't happen by accident. We find out later. I'm going to get to you know what? I'll get to it now, maybe. Oh, yeah. She was on the ship. She underwent tests. I mentioned they took a tracking device out of her.
Yeah. Where was that? Her nose?
It's up her nose, apparently.
Yeesh.
Apparently, that's a good place to put a tracking device.
Okay.
But they did more tests, including probes of her bodies with a needle.
Oy.
Like I said, they removed the tracking device from her head. She also had a visionary experience of traveling into another world where she met a being she perceived as God.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting is, as I mentioned, apparently this was not her first rodeo.
Mm-hmm.
Betty hooked up with this hypnotist, but like past lives type of like regression therapy, that kind of thing to try and get to the heart of what was going on. His name's Dr. Fowler. And I believe he's the one that wrote this book with her, or maybe even he wrote the book and, it's just based on notes from her. But her first experience happened in 1944 when she was 7 years old. She was in a playhouse waiting for a friend when a strange red orb entered the small play space and settled between her eyes. As it did, her head began to ring out with strange voices telling her they were watching her. They also claimed they would meet again when she was 12, which they did.
Mm-hmm.
In 1949, she was walking in a woodland in nearby Westminster when a gray creature dressed in a one-piece overall, covered with buttons and symbols, stepped out in front of her. It pressed a button on its overall.
Wow.
And
cool.
Another one of these red orbs emerged.
Oh.
The orb, like before, settled on her face between her eyes, and again her head filled with strange but now familiar voices. And I forgot to mention that's part of why the Quaker, the fact that, or not a Quaker, the fact that she was a Shaker is interesting in here because she's very religious, and a lot of people say if this experience had happened 100 years earlier, it would have been a religious vision that she had.
Mm-hmm.
And probably would have been taken pretty seriously amongst the other Shakers. But because it's the 70s, we have this UFO alien lens to view these things
I see.
through.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
Then a year later, in 1950, another orb would take her on was arguably one of the most bizarre encounters. Want to know one of my favorite sounds? Here it is. That's the sound I hear when I'm learning a new language with Babbel. And if you want to learn a new language this year, I guarantee it'll be one of your favorite sounds too. You can become a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching, so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. One of my favorite things about Babbel, everybody's addicted to their phones nowadays, but when you're doing, your exercises on Babbel, you feel like you're actually learning something. You're not just endlessly scrolling through a feed or whatever. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Here's a special deal for our listeners. Right now, you can get 55% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/weird. Get 55% off at babbel.com/weird, spelled BABBEL.com/weird. You know how to spell weird. Rules and restrictions may apply. She was taken on board the ship again. A strange instrument was put in her mouth, which held down her tongue. She found herself on a bizarre wheel made of a rubber-like substance. The craft entered a body of water, she did not know where, and would emerge in an underground base. So seemingly that was like maybe had something to do with like going into the base, that she needed to be put in this rubber-like substance and have her tongue held down.
Rubber-like substance as in like a liquid?
That was kind of
Or
like a jello. Like something like
Okay.
that was kind of the way I took it. But here's where it got weird. She was brought to this underground base and they brought her. This is kind of nice. I mean, maybe this is going to change my opinion on
Abductions.
abductions. They took her through a museum of time
Oh.
with different versions of humans throughout history on display in glass-like containers.
So when you hear different versions of humans, how do you interpret that?
I believe, based on drawings that I saw from this, there are a lot of drawings.
Okay.
And it was kind of like, there were cavemen in there. There were like Victorian era people.
Oh, okay.
That they kind of took a couple of people every, 100 years or so and used their, freezing technology to put them in one of these little cases.
Oh, wow.
So that people could come take a gander at them. Well, presumably the aliens would, they were the ones taking a gander most of the time, but every once in a while they take a visitor and say, hey, check this out. What do you think of this? A caveman in a tube. Now, but also keep in mind, these are aliens. It could be, that could have been just like a crazy hologram or robot. It wasn't necessarily people, but she apparently got the impression like, no, those are real people. They're just frozen in these tubes to look at. That would suck.
Yeah, I'll say.
Yeah. So maybe that changes my opinion back the other way
Yes.
of being abducted, because I'm thinking about seeing all these cavemen. I'm not thinking they might freeze me and put me in there.
You might be added to the museum.
Yeah, 5,000 years from now, they're going to be like, look what dopes looked like.
In the year 2024.
Yeah, look at this guy. They'll unfreeze me for a second. Help! Please get me out of this They freeze me again. Also, during the same encounter, although she didn't elaborate how, she was caused to have an out-of-body experience and enter a world of light. She would later describe this encounter as feeling at oneness with all things.
Okay, yeah.
So like a very spiritual experience at the end there.
Huh. How old would she have been at this time? Like,
she would have been, so 1950, she would have been a teenager.
Okay.
Yeah, she would have been, oh no, I'm sorry. She would have been 11? No, 13. Yeah.
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 Okay. Mm-hmm.
And again, these memories didn't come back to her until she had her hypnosis done to her. So as I mentioned, this is kind of an interesting case because there's so much religious elements in here as well. And she had a kind of complex life, I get. Not necessarily her life, but her story kind of got complex later on because she, not too long after this, I guess, actually, married this guy called Bob Luca and settled in Connecticut, where her home became the scene of, some unusual occurrences. Basically, she went on to claim that her and her new husband were repeatedly abducted by aliens. Lots and lots of stories that he then started getting abducted. He would wake up with, strange marks and scars that he didn't remember that were similar to the one she had also had in the past. So the idea being that, they're now interested in him as well.
So when you say new husband.
Mm-hmm. No, so her first husband, so this was the guy she had 7 kids with.
Okay.
That she was married to in 1967 when all this happened.
Okay.
But then 1977, which I believe is around when the book came out, she was now divorced and married to a new guy, Bob Luca.
I see.
I don't know if the first husband had any encounters himself, or if he did, maybe he just wanted to keep them to himself.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy Bob did have encounters as well. And now where things get a little questionable, I guess, is that she and the new husband, put out a bunch of further books about her experiences. The hypnotherapist trained the husband in how to do these regression sessions. So then he would start doing them for her.
On her
to get her memories, which is very like, So this is a really complex thing, but apparently you can just teach some lady's husband how to do it in an afternoon, and then he can just take over and
that's very strange.
they can keep the stories going, keep pumping out the books without having to pay some hypnotherapist to come in and do it. So in February of 2007, Betty and Bob Luca's son, Robert Jr., a.k.a. Bob Jr., announced that the Andreasson affair was a hoax. In a 2,000-word email available on UFO Updates, Robert Jr. claimed that his father was a compulsive liar who had drinking problems, while his mother needed serious psychological help and had serious issues. According to Robert Jr., Betty had been experiencing emotional shock because 2 of her sons had earlier died in a car accident. After meeting her second husband, Betty would write about every dream she had as though it were an abduction, and Bob encouraged her and even manipulated investigators into believing the stories. Now, the official Andreasson affair website has an open letter from Bob Luca rebuking his son's claims. According to the elder Luca, his son was estranged from the family and struggled with drugs and alcohol. He also announced that his son was now deceased, although he didn't specify the causes. So, that's very much a who do you believe there.
Right. Yeah.
I tend to, give some credence to the son because, what does the son have to gain from, quote unquote, exposing them?
Right.
And, it sounds like a lot of people around Betty were potentially kind of, maybe not taking advantage of her, but
okay,
hopping on the UFO money gravy train, as it were.
So essentially, they were putting out these books. There was quite a number of them, and they did well.
Well enough.
Okay.
They were apparently real big fixtures on like the UFO conference circuit. So I think a lot of, having a little booth and selling your books, doing autographs, telling your story, that kind of thing. It kind of went from a couple of isolated incidents to then, Bob and Betty are going on adventures with the aliens every night.
Right.
Also, one of her kids, Becky, Betty's older daughter, also had some experiences herself. She developed the ability to fall into a trance and perform automatic writing at age 8. And she would just kind of draw a lot of strange symbols and stuff. Just kind of cover page after page with. And the Dr. Fowler, the guy who wrote the book and was the hypnotist, he said that the drawings were found to be very similar to the so-called spirit writing practiced by the Shakers, an early American religious sect.
Okay, so I see. So it would make sense then they raise their children to be Shakers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the stuff, it's kind of like a mix of, Shaker stories, Shaker lore, mixed in with like UFO and alien lore, which was huge in the 70s. These kinds of stories, people can get enough of them.
Yeah.
So also like kind of getting the daughter involved, and she's doing automatic writing, which again is kind of I don't know. How would you describe something like that, where you're just kind of like falling into a trance and doing something? I just think that there are plenty of explanations beyond spiritual and alien for how your brain, how your subconscious is just kind of making things.
Right, like a creative flow state.
Yeah, I'm
just
thinking
incredibly
like free writing.
Right, or you're just very, very focused, sort of in this zone.
Yeah, you're kind of letting, you're feeling, you're trying to make yourself feel like a conduit to something, like a channel to something.
Right.
But yeah, like I said, along with the religious stuff, this also follows the somewhat pretty standard abduction experiences of step 1, capture. There's a whole Wikipedia page with just like, here's the standard abduction. Here's what happens. Step 1, capture. The abductee is forcibly taken from terrestrial surroundings to an apparent alien spacecraft. Step 2, examination. Invasive medical or scientific procedures are performed. Step 3, conference. The abductors speak to the abductee. Then a tour, which is nice. The abductees are given a tour of the vessel. Loss of time. Abductees rapidly forget the majority of their experience. Return. The abductees are returned to Earth, occasionally in a different location from where they were allegedly taken, or with new injuries or disheveled clothing. Sometimes you hear about people having their clothes on backwards when they come back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Theophany. The abductee has a profound mystical experience accompanied by a feeling of oneness with God or the universe.
So mystical, also like a spiritual kind of like Betty was saying. Yeah.
When she was brought to the one, the being that she kind of perceived as God. And then the aftermath. The abductee must cope with psychological, physical, and social effects of the experience. So yeah, like I said, she sadly passed away a couple of years ago. So, we can't grill her now, but
but they maintained their story for
she maintained her story up until the very end, I believe, unless there was some deathbed confession that I couldn't find online.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, she kept it up. And I mean, who knows? One of these encounters or maybe some of these encounters could have happened, and the stuff that seems like inconsistent or whatever is her, trying to make it fit into her worldview.
Possible.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in it's interesting that I don't think I know of any other stories where someone is abducted again and again.
Oh,
or
really? Like that,
throughout the course of their lives?
Yeah, that's very common.
Oh, well, I guess I'm not up on my abductee
but a
stories.
lot of times those people, they don't remember it until they are hypnotized.
I was going to ask, is it usually that's how they remember it?
But usually the idea is something along the lines of like, the aliens are tracking them throughout their lives.
Right.
And that's why they're putting implants in. That's why they keep coming back. There's a lot of stories of people's children, then
Yikes.
getting abducted in life, that they kind of follow families.
Huh.
Which, if you think about how we study creatures out in nature, that's the kind of stuff we do, tag and release and come back and keep an eye on the kids and all that. Anyway, that's it for this week's Want to Hear Something Weird. If you want to hear more weird things, check out our social media. Want to Hear Pod on all the social media networks. Just look for it. You'll find it, unless you're on one of those weird ones that nobody's on. You can also email us, wannahearpod@gmail.com. You can send us a voicemail, or you can just send us an old-fashioned email, or you can go to speakpipe.wannahearpod.com/wannahearpod. And that gives you a real easy way to leave a voicemail. If you've got some kind of spooky story you'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear it.
We want to hear your weird story.
And as always, we appreciate those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Those help young little podcasts like us, and we appreciate it.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next week.
Want to Hear Something Weird is a Clamor audio production, distributed by the Cloud 10 Network. Hosted and executive produced by Tom Reynolds and me, Laura Anderson. Executive produced by Aaron Hilliard.
Clamor General Manager Rich Statter, Associate Producer Ethan Aronson, Post-Production Supervised by Devin Ruskin, Production Assistant Samara Mullick. Special thanks to Sim Sarna and Saiba Krieger at Cloud 10.
Seeking the truth never gets old. Introducing June's Journey, the free-to-play mobile game that will immerse you in a thrilling murder mystery. Join June Parker as she uncovers hidden objects and clues to solve her sister's death in a beautifully illustrated world set in the Roaring 20s. With new chapters added every week, the excitement never ends. Download June's Journey now on your Android or iOS device, or play on PC through Facebook Games.